10% that they're talking about for China is 10% added on to all of the tariffs that are already in existence.
Trump is opening the door for potentially another negotiation.
I believe that commentator has it wrong. Welcome, Patriots. I'm Bruce Rutherford, your host and commentator for Common Sense for America. And this is our section where we talk about current events, current topics, and try to make some sense of all of the noise that's out there in the news. And today we want to talk about the tariffs. Now, we all know that tariffs are probably going to have some effect on each of us individually in the form of inflation, prices, the ability to get something when we want it or not. Let's listen to this commentary and let's talk about it as we go.
The president addressing Mexico and Canada and the tariffs set to go on next week and saying tariffs are scheduled to go into effect on March 4th, and they will indeed go into effect as scheduled on China. China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date.
Let's be clear about one thing. The 10% that they're talking about for China is 10% added on to all of the tariffs that are already in existence against China, and there are lots of them. Now, in April, he's talking about reciprocal tariffs. So if country X has a 4% tariff against American goods, he wants to put a 4% tariff on that country's goods coming into the United States. That's the idea of reciprocal tariffs. And the idea is to make things fair, but also to bring these countries to the negotiating table.
Then there's this additional line, which I think is going to cause a little bit of confusion. China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date. Now, I think many people are looking at this and they're saying, is Trump talking about the 10% that already went into effect in early February, or is this in addition to that 10%? I am reading this as Trump is opening the door for potentially another negotiation of this 10% with China that is going to come into effect. They have just 5 days. March 4th. That's going to be the key date now, the first one up when it comes to these tariffs.
I believe that commentator has it wrong. The 10% on China will be 10% added to all the existing tariffs on China. Now, he is clearly willing to negotiate that with China, but she is under the impression that this is a 10% plus 10% or 20%. That is not correct. Now, the Canadian and the Mexican tariffs are very much a negotiating hammer, if you will, to drive these countries to the negotiating table. Now, if you'll remember, we did a podcast on tariffs, and in that, we explained that tariffs can have an inflationary effect if you, the consumer, can't get the product or service that you want from any other source. Now, let's take lumber coming from Canada. It's one of the things that Canada exports the most to the United States. The United States has plenty of lumber within the 48 states. So the imposition of a tariff on Canadian lumber into the United States is not likely to be inflationary. Now let's take automobile parts coming from Mexico into the United States. And I don't know if y'all are old enough to remember the so-called Maquiladora program, which had twin factories, one on one side of the Mexican border, one on the other side of the Mexican border. Some of the work was done in Mexico, then it comes across the border and it's finished and goes into the United States. This was a key element of the North American Free Trade Agreement. What Trump is saying now is that he wants those factories on the southern side of the Mexican border to come across into the United States, and he wants those things manufactured in the United States with United States workers. Now, this is a negotiation that will take place, and some of this is actually going to happen. We're already hearing about American pharmaceutical companies moving pharmaceutical production from Mexico into the United States. We're already hearing about data center companies moving certain activities from Mexico and Canada into the United States. We're already hearing about automobile companies planning to build new automobile assembly plants in the United States. More than 50% of all the cars sold in the United States are manufactured outside of the United States. So what he wants to do is to bring economic activity inside the United States for the benefit of United States workers. Question is, how inflationary will that be? In most cases, United States consumers can buy an alternative in the United States that is not subject to tariffs. Let's just say, okay, I'd love to own a Mercedes, which is manufactured in Germany, but instead, I could buy a Cadillac. Now, a Lexus is going to be manufactured in Japan unless it's manufactured in one of Lexus's factories in the United States. Maybe I'll buy the Lexus, which is not subject to tariffs. So you see, this key element in the inflationary aspect of these tariffs is whether or not you, the consumer, can buy an alternative product that is not subject to tariffs. Now, the United States economy is so huge and so diverse that that will be the case more often than not. So I want every patriot to understand this issue of tariffs and understand Trump. Most of this he is setting up for negotiation. I don't think Trump deliberately wants to create inflation in the United States, quite the opposite. So most of these blunt announcements and threats in the press and in the public, that's his style of negotiation. And we've seen this from him for the last 40 years in his business career. Don't get too worried about this just yet. And remember, the United States economy is so large and so diverse, you're not going to be left without choices. Let's see how this all pans out.